Murder on the Orient Express, Evil Under the Sun, Death on the Nile, and then there were none. Just a handful of novels created by one of the most prolific mystery writers of the 20th century, Agatha Christie. A woman herself who would become embroiled in a plot worthy of one of her own novels. For on December 3rd, 1926, Agatha Christie vanished for 11 days. Deeply shrouded in the mystique of the wealthy society of Edwardian upper class, Agatha was quite unlike most women of her day. Independent, curious, and surrounded by many strong women during her upbringing that would reinforce her desire to possess her own mind. She had a thirst for knowledge beyond the trappings of English country life. She sought a formal education and found Paris more to her liking than the traditional strict British institutions for women. Upon her return to England, Agatha and her mother left for Cairo, seeking the warmer climate in hopes of restoring her mother's declining health. During her time in Egypt, she spent most of it exploring the monuments, yet taking no official interest in archaeology. However, the subject would be later employed and prominently interwoven throughout her novels. Not long after her return to her home in Torquay, she would meet Archibald Christie, who would become her first husband. The two would marry on Christmas Eve 1914, as Archie was being sent to France to fight in World War I. It was during this time she began to consider following in the steps of one of her literary heroes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, and wanted to imagine her own master sleuth, former Belgian police detective Hercule Poirot, who would appear in 33 of her novels, although it would not be another 20 years before she would write her most famous story, Murder on the Orient Express. Agatha would continue writing in spite years of rejections from publishers. But during the early 1920s, Agatha Christie did begin making a name for herself. And while she had not yet achieved the pinnacle of her writing career, she had become a household name. So much so that an event in December 1926 would take the world by surprise, when the young mystery writer simply vanished. On the night of December 3rd, 1926, Agatha Christie left her secretary a letter stating she was going to Yorkshire. But when the letter was received, and the secretary found Agatha's only daughter, Rosalind, alone and asleep in the house, she knew something was wrong. When it was discovered Agatha had never arrived in Yorkshire and that her car had been found wrecked and abandoned at the edge of the road of Newlands Corner, her secretary promptly informed police. Upon examination, all that was found was her expired driver's license and some clothes in the back seat. Had the mystery writer herself become a victim of foul play? As police arrived at the family estate in Birksdale to investigate, it was discovered her husband was nowhere to be found either, and police now did not know if they had two missing persons on their hands or perhaps a double murder. While the estate seemed in order, with no signs of a struggle and nothing stolen, detectives were called in to try and retrace the steps of Mrs. Christie. In a classic style reminiscent of one of her novels, detectives questioned everyone in the Christie household, inquiring to the events leading up to the night in question. Servants of the time were extremely reluctant to divulge intimate details of their employers, not only for the fear of being fired, but it was simply something not done. England at the time was still steeped in the separation of classes, and airing the dirty laundry of one's employer could result in never working again. However, it would not be long before police would be able to question Colonel Archibald Christie himself, Upon his return to their estate, you can imagine his concern to find police and detectives searching his home for clues to his missing wife. Colonel Christie exclaimed that he was away for the weekend, but his wife had been in good health at the time of his departure. It was at this time he was informed his wife had left a letter stating she was going to Yorkshire, and her abandoned car had been found in the country. In order to establish his alibi, Christie was forced to admit that he was with his mistress in Surrey. Upon further questioning, police learned that the couple had argued that evening, resulting in Mr. Christie storming out and Agatha leaving in her own car approximately at 9:45 p.m. After contacting Mrs. Christie's circle of friends and no one having any idea of where she might be and not having heard from her, serious concern for her safety was now at the forefront of the police investigation, with Colonel Christie as their prime suspect. Once the press caught wind of the story, it began appearing on the front pages of the UK's leading newspapers, and even garnered a headline on the front page of the New York Times. It was the perfect tabloid story, with all the elements of an Agatha Christie whodunit. Close to the scene of the car accident was a natural spring known as the Silent Pool. Was it possible the young novelist had deliberately drowned herself? Silent Pool was dragged just in case, but Mrs. Christie was nowhere to be found. Over 1,000 police officers and 1,500 volunteers began searching the English countryside. The public outcry was so great that Home Secretary William Johnson Hicks pressured police and a newspaper to offer a reward. During this time, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle became involved in her search. With his serious affinity for the occult, Conan Doyle employed the use of seeking a well-known medium to locate her by providing one of Mrs. Christie's gloves in hopes of discovering where the missing mystery writer might have gone. While fellow author Dorothy Sayles visited the scene of where the car was found in hopes of discovering clues. Neither event produced anything worthy of bringing them any closer to the answer of where she had gone. As the days progressed on and still no sign of Agatha, the public had become convinced her husband had murdered her and did away with her corpse. The press had a field day inventing wild scenarios, while others speculated this was nothing more than a publicity stunt to help increase sales of her latest book. But it did pose the question, what if Mrs. Christie had disappeared on purpose? With his personal safety at risk, Colonel Archibald Christie was desperate to find his missing wife. And in an odd turn of events, one of the most unlikely people in the world would be the one to solve the question on everyone's mind. Had Agatha Christie been murdered? Bob Tappan, a banjo player at the Swan Hotel in Harrogate, recognized the mystery writer and alerted police, who in turn informed Colonel Christie, who promptly arrived only to discover an even more perplexing mystery. That while his wife was alive and well, she was registered in the hotel as Teresa Neal, Neal being the surname of his mistress. Agatha would claim to have no memory of any of the events of that night or how she came to being a guest at the Swan Hotel. She claimed to have woken up and believed that she had arrived in Harrogate from Africa, and when presented with photos of herself in the newspaper, the mystery writer said she did not recognize that woman. According to the official report, police believed that after the argument between the Christies, the upset Agatha left their home to be with friends. In her state of depression, she crashed her car, causing her to suffer a brief bout of amnesia. She then took the train to Harrogate and checked into the Swan Hotel. With no identification and her mind in a flux of confusion, she registered under the only name she could think of, which was the surname of her husband's mistress. And the only explanation of stating to have arrived from Africa, as it was the last place of happiness she had experienced with her recently deceased mother. While others claimed it to be an outright lie in order to avoid embarrassment, 2 doctors insisted she was suffering from what was then known as a fugue state, from the trauma of her husband abandoning her for another woman. And what woman, let alone a mother, would knowingly leave her 7-year-old daughter behind and all alone? It was concluded the only way that was possible was if she was suicidal, and the accident thus caused her amnesia. Agatha Christie never spoke of her missing 11 days, and over the years many speculations have been offered, from the simple distraught wife suffering from depression, a failed suicide attempt, or even the more clever, elaborate scenario in which the philandering husband and mistress would become suspect in her disappearance. A mystery that only a writer such as herself could craft. One in which she would never reveal the solution, the perfect whodunit, complete with a villain, a victim, and a mystery that would endure for all the ages. Whatever the truth was, only Agatha Christie knew the answer.